Can you hear me now? I think you should be able to hear me now. All right. Okay. Good morning. How's everyone doing? Ahora esto. I don't know how I feel about you after last week. I don't know. I may have to take moderator privileges from you. Morning, Andres. Kiran. Alrighty. How am I doing battery wise? Okay. Can you hear me? You can hear me, right? Okay. So where are we? Good morning, everyone. So, what are we doing today? Well, today what are we doing today? We're taking a small break from the series that we've been doing, the Learning C# series, because because there's an exercise that I want to do. My students at Harvard are going to start doing their first assignment next week, and it's going to be a really nice assignment where they're going to capture their motion using a Grasshopper plugin, and then I'm going to ask them to visualize their motion in three-dimensional form somehow, right? So what I would like to do today is I would like to record a couple videos. One of them being I would like to record a video on having a CSV file, so a comma separated values file, and how to, from Visual Studio, how to read that CSV file and parse it. So that's one thing, so that you can get data. And then the other thing that I would like to do is, like, once you have all this data on your system, then what are the things that you can do to visualize? For example, let's say you have a collection of planes in three-dimensional space that represent motion. So what are the things that you can do, for example, with C# in Rhino Common to represent that motion, to represent this trajectory? So the first one is going to be basically a video on how to parse CSV files. And then the second one is going to be an algorithm, and I'm going to call that, for example, a coding gem or something like that. And then the second one is going to be more of an algorithmic modeling challenge, perhaps. So given a collection of planes, then how do we take them, and how do we parse them, and how do we represent them in three-dimensional space? So we're going to take a break from learning C#. We're going to make some exercises on how to apply it, and then we'll take it from there. Today we're having a double stream. We're having a morning stream right now at 10 a.m. and then we're having another one at 2 p.m. my time in Boston time. Okay? For those of you who might be new, I want to remind you that we have a Discord channel where we have offline conversations every week. So I'm going to paste the link here. And then I also want to remind you that we have a calendar. Where is this? That we have a calendar, a Google Calendar. If you want to be up to date about when we're going to have streams and when they're coming out, we have a Google Calendar that you can subscribe to. And if I can find the link to that, the calendar. All right, here. I will post it on the Discord. Yes, there you go. That's the link if you want to be, because I typically announce when I'm streaming on my Instagram, my Twitter, that thing. But if you're more of a Google Calendar person, you can follow that, and then just it will pop up on your calendar view when are we streaming. Okay. Now, I think I will record the parsing CSV files this morning, and I think I will do the one with the motion, visualizing motion. I will do that in the afternoon. So that's probably how it's going to work. And we can probably have some Q&A and some social after each one of the two sessions, after the one in the morning and the one in the afternoon. So I think that's probably a good plan for today. If you have any questions, concerns, anything, you can put them on the chat. I actually have to prepare here. So let me change a couple of things here in my system before we start. Because I do have some sample files, but I want to take that code and I need to plan. So I need to take some CSV files as sample files, so I need to prepare a couple things. So it's going to be a slow start, I think. 26 today. Yes. Okay. So where am I? Oh, you're not seeing my screen, right? Okay. Alrighty. And actually, the morning video, the CSV video, parsing CSVs, is going to be pure C# all the way until the last part of the video, in which I will take that code and bring it into a C# component and then show you how to read the CSV files from Grasshopper. And then the other video, the having planes in three-dimensional space and visualizing motions, that is going to be C# in Grasshopper. Okay? So the first thing that I want to do before I start is that I have some sample code that I need to review. So I need to find that and give it a look and see how can we adapt that to the video. And then I also need to find some CSV files, right? Which I am going to show you. We open sourced a bunch of recordings from Motion that we did at my course last year. We open sourced them. I have them somewhere. I need to look them up. So and I am going to stop this here. Yes. And I am recording, right? Yes, I am recording. Okay. So intro to computation. Assignment 0. Okay. Okay, so we have a file here that I used last year to save. Timestamp, human readable. So this was for saving files, okay? And then we had another one that was the reader. This one. Okay. Okay. Oh, but I did not read the file. Because I read the file using. Okay, so this will not really. Oh well, I can use this. Oh, and these are the paths. Oh, I see. So I would need to read the file from the system. Okay, so I think we can do that. But then because I thought I had the reading part figured out here, which I clearly do not. So I'm going to need to figure that out. Okay, so I have no idea how to do that, but I guess we can improvise as we record. You see here the motion of how it's visualized here. This is kind of cool, I think. Alrighty. Yeah, I have a bunch of examples here, so that could be cool. All right. And where are these files actually? Which files am I reading? Oh. Rhino Common, recordings. Okay. All right. So let me take, for example, I'm going to take Brian 9. I'm going to take. Sorry that I have to do this. I just woke up literally, so I haven't really prepared for this. I'm just finding like a couple of good sample CSV files, and then I want to use them for the video. And then we'll start recording. Okay, so this one is cool. What about this one? This one is cool too. Which one is this one? Giagene 2. Okay, so that one is cool. And what about this one? Well, that's a lot. Oh, okay. All right. So, okay, so I think this is probably good enough. And what other files do I have here? The record, I don't want the record, I want this one. Okay, so that's probably good for now. Those two files. Then I need to figure out how to read a file, a text file from, how to read a text file from the console. So let's open Visual Studio. Okay. This is going to be motion 1, and this is going to be motion 2. Okay, and I need to figure out how to do that. Create a new project, and then console application, for example. And here I want this on my desktop. CSV reader. And then I'm going to copy the two files. I'm going to copy the two files to the desktop. And then here, okay, so what do we do when we don't know or we don't remember how to do something? We go to Stack Overflow. Read text file from with this C#. Okay, how to read a text file. Okay, so that's going to be easy. So we're going to take main and then string up. That's very simple, actually. String text, and then this is going to be where are my files? So if I go to my desktop, where is no? Okay, what is my desktop? Users. Users JLX. Yeah, so this is probably JLX, and this is desktop, and this is going to be motion1.csv, and then I'm going to. That was much easier than I expected, I think. If it works, console.writeLine text and then console read key. Okay. Let's see if this works. Ooh, yes, it did work. Okay, great. So I think we're ready to start. Okay. And we don't need this. So how are we going to start? We're going to start by we're going to start by, oh wait, and I also want to show that here we have motion, and we can save this as CSV files. Okay, so I want to save this as CSV. I probably want to talk about that too. Do I have the option? Oh, sucks. Okay, I need a converter because Excel will not do that for me. CSV to TSV. Free online CSV to TSV converter. It's ridiculous that I have to do this. That Excel will not do it for me. Okay, so upload your file. Okay, save as TSV. Convert now. Give it to me. Okay, and this is going to be, where am I? Streams, files, here. Okay, and then, so that's a TSV file, and then convert another file, here, convert now, and this I also want to open with, okay, open with code. Yes. Okay. Okay, so I think we're good. No? Can I? No. I cannot. Wait. And I'm going to here on CSV, I'm just going to paste everything here. Okay. All right. I think we're ready. I think we are. Are we ready? Okay. I think we are. So, what are we going to do? How is this going to work? I want to make a video, and the video I want to explain. The video is going to be about parsing CSV files. In the video, should I get a CSV file that is a bit simpler than the one that I have shown? I probably want something a bit simpler because it's a little too much. Sample CSV file. Let's see. Sample CSV files. Download CSV file. What is this? Florida insurance? Could it be anything more boring? Addresses. That looks doable. So if I go to desktop and I go to CSV and I now open this, yeah, this is doable. Okay, I think I can do this. Let me convert this to CSV to TSV converter. Yeah, this is probably a better way because I want to show a simpler file before showing that crazy thing with all the numbers that I was going to do. So, okay, so here, CSV, yeah. And I also probably want to show this file. This link is cool. Earth travel biostats, cities. What is cities? Interesting. But I don't like the the double quotes situation here. No, this could be a simple one as well, but I don't like it. Faithful freshman grades. What about this one, grades? What's with the double quotes? Why doesn't it get parsed directly as text? So this one works, but this one doesn't? How is that possible? So grades are going to be, I'm going to save it here. And I'm going to open it in with code. I'm going to open it with code. Okay. And I'm noticing that one of my microphones, what if I change this? What if I am to say find all this and replace with nothing? And all these white spaces, this is very odd too. Okay, let's find all the spaces and then remove them and then just keep last name, first name. This looks more like a CSV file to me. Okay, so I like this better. Okay, and then this one, let's turn this one into a CSV to TSV, so that I can show it. And what about addresses? Yeah, this one is also really weird. Let me find all the and replace them. No. Quotes. Yes. Yeah, this file is just really bad. I don't wanna. Yeah, no addresses here. We're just going to do grades. Okay. Okay, that looks good. And we're going to keep that somewhere there. We're going to keep this somewhere here. And then I think we're ready to start. So I'm going to write myself a few notes here because I want to make a video where the video is going to be, first of all, it's going to be an intro to what we're doing. I'm thinking actually of writing like a multi-part video into what are we doing. Then the second video is going to be what is a CSV file. What is a CSV file? And also talk about TSVs and then parsing a CSV file. In Visual Studio with C#, and then now parsing a CSV file in Grasshopper with C#. Yeah, that's probably a good 4-part video. I think that's nice, and I think I like the addresses, the grades, because it has numerical data. It has numerical data, it has text data, and it has a header, which is also kind of nice. So I think I'm going to use this as an example. Yeah. I might use this as an example. And then, and this is for parsing a CSV file into Visual Studio. And then I can use, when I go to Grasshopper, and then I can use the motion files that I the motion files that I was actually intending to do. Okay, I think we're ready for this. Woohoo! Are we ready for this? Okay, so I have this. So I probably don't need Rhino for this. And I probably don't need... well, let me... CSV file. Is there a Wikipedia page or something like that? Comma separated values? Okay, is this any useful that I show this in the video? I mean, it's not very exciting, but whatever. I may want to bring this in here. CSV files, okay. I can probably start with this. And okay. All right, so we're ready to start. Or also, let me change the batteries of the microphone. I'll be right back. I don't want the sound to stop. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. Okay. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so let's start this exercise first by talking about the basics and then breaking down what is actually a CSV file. CSV files stand for comma separated values. As we can see, this is the Wikipedia page. I'm not even sure this is very useful to show, but anyway, CSV files stand for files that contain data in a format that is separated by commas. It's just as simple as that. So if you actually Google CSV file examples, you will hit like a bunch of websites that can give you sample CSV data. And I run into this one that has like a bunch of very simple CSV files that are interesting. So I downloaded the one that says grades.csv. And I modified it a little bit. Okay, so now what I have in my system is this file here called grades.csv, and I have other files that I will explain very soon in this video. Okay, now the idea is that typically if you haven't done anything on your system before and you have, for example, Microsoft Spreadsheet, typically CSV files are automatically detected by Excel, and then if you double click them, then Excel will open up and it will give you something like this. It will give you a table where you can see that you have columns. The columns may or may not have a header that displays what information is inside of this file. This is typically something, it depends on the CSV file, okay? And then you can see that basically we have columns, all right? And then we have, for each one of these columns, we have values. So for example, we have names here, we have social security numbers, which I don't know who did this, but hopefully these are fake. We could have email, for example. And then here in the columns text 1, text 2, text 3, we have numbers. And then there's a final column called grade, which is text again, is also a string, and it has like the final grade for each one of these virtual students. I can also see that here there is something that looks like an error, and I'll probably get back to that as soon as I see the file. So typically CSV files, if you open them with Google, with Excel spreadsheet. They look like any other spreadsheet, but the difference is that they're actually not spreadsheets at all. What they are is that they are simple, plain text files that you can open with any single text editor that you want. Notepad, Microsoft Word, Visual Studio, Atom, Sublime Text, whatever, right? And then if you open them, then they have plain text inside. And what they have is like all this data represented line by line. So every line of these is just a line of data where each one of these columns is separated by a comma. So let's take a look at that. Let's forget about Google, about Excel. I don't know why I have Google spreadsheets in my head so strongly today, but let's forget about that. And then let's open any text editor of your choice. I'm going to be using Visual Studio, but the fact that Visual Studio runs code has nothing to do with this. I could be using a simple Notepad, okay? And let me actually use Notepad. If I use Notepad and then I just drop here grades, what you can see is that I can open this file with any text editor, and inside I have a first line with all the headers for that data, and then I have for every line I have all the values that I saw in that table, and each one of the values, each one of the columns is separated by this comma here. Okay, does that make sense? Now what's interesting is that this idea of having tabular data that is structured in columns and rows, but having it in such a simple plain text file with such a common convention, such as separating all the column data with commas, is an extremely popular format because it's very easy to read, it's very easy to write, it's very easy to exchange. It doesn't have, you don't have to care about encodings or anything complicated, and then it's very easy also to parse with computer programming, with code. Okay, so what we're going to do is in this series, in this video, in this exercise, I'm going to show you how to write code in order to take all of this file, bring it into a program, and then be able to chop all those strings with their commas and take that data and put it in a way that is a bit more orderly and can be used for other purposes. Okay, I'm going to drop the same file in my Visual Studio Code editor, and you can see that I have some plugins that highlight when they detect that it's a CSV file, so they highlight which ones are the columns and the rows, and then it colors things differently. And for example, one thing that I can see in this way is that remember when I opened this with Excel and I saw that there was a row that it looked like it was offset. It looked like this should be here, this should probably be here, etc., etc. It feels like this number is off. It feels like there should be a comma here in the middle. And it feels like, yes, that probably here in the middle there should be a comma. And then as I do that comma, everything offsets. And now it looks like I have the right structure for my data. So I'm going to save this file. And I cannot because I have it open here. So I'm going to retry to save the file, and I'm going to open it again with Excel. And now I can see that row, I don't even know which row that was anymore, but that row, all the rows now look correct. Okay, and you can see how also Excel is actually taking the numbers and is rounding them, is removing the decimal part that all of them have here in the tabular data, in the CSV data. Okay, so CSV files, you can write CSV files manually. They're super easy to read, they're super easy to write, and if you have any empowered text editor like Visual Studio Code, for example, with some plugins, with some extensions, it's also with the color coding, it's very easy to read which data belongs to which column. Okay, something that I want to say before we start actually writing any code is that you may also run sometimes into this alternative way of writing this particular format, which is TSV data. Okay, this is also a fairly popular format, not as much as CSV, but TSV stands for tab separated values. And the idea is that it's the exact same concept, it's the exact same idea. It's also like a grid, a table of data, but instead of using the comma as the character, the separator, it uses the tab character or the tabular space. So if I were to drop this here, you can see how basically now instead of commas, I have this character. These are not white spaces. This is the tab character, which in my system is 2 units, right? This is just another convention. So there are people who like it better. There are people who like it less. Some people argue that it's easier to read because you see the tab space and therefore reading the columns is a bit easier. That's your choice. Some other people argue that it's better because typically if you're importing text, sometimes you will have commas inside of that text, and then you have to use double quotes to make sure that you wrap everything that has commas inside of the double quotes so that those commas do not get confused with with the commas that separate the values, right? Whereas tab characters, they're very unlikely to be found in regular text, right? So there are people that like this format better, but at the end of the day, it's the exact same concept. It's tabular data, but instead of using the comma as a character separator, you're using the tab character, okay? All right, so with this, I think what I would like to do is now move on to the next video where I'm going to show you how to write a very small program in C# that you can use to read a text file like CSV and TSV, because at the end of the day, they're plain text files like any other file. And then to do some string manipulation so that we can chop all this data and create lists with the name, social security number, the grade, etc., etc. Okay? So let's take a look at what that would look like. Okay, so that was CSV files. This would need a tab here. Okay, I'm going to keep that here. And then I'm going to close this. Yes, I'm going to close this. And okay, and then I'm going to do grades here. Let me. What is that? Okay. Why can I not open? Could not find? Oh, because it's in CSV. Okay. All right, great. So I'm going to take this somewhere else. Here, I'm going to write myself some notes. Okay. So all right. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? Parastorm, Partic, what's up? All right. So now we're going to read the CSV file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first read the raw file, and then I'm going to split the file. How am I going to split the file? I wonder if there's any function that already splits the text with a new line character. So that would be string row CSV, and that would be system.io.file.read all lines. There you go. Reads all lines of the files and then closes the file. I like this, and it gives me an array of strings. Very good. Read all text. Maybe I can talk about that, about the difference between these two. And then here I can just say c dot, and then c dot users dot desktop dot csv, csv dot grades dot csv. Okay, I like that. Okay, so I think I'm going to go for that. All right. And I'm going to put this here. Okay, and I'm there. All right, so let's do this. The content of the CSV file. Okay. All right, so let's start. We have discussed in the previous video what a CSV file is, how it's plain text. So it's just a file that contains strings. It contains plain text. And then what we're going to do in this video is we're going to write a small program that reads the text that is contained in any text file. And then we're going to do some string manipulation to take each one of the lines, chop them by the commas, and then use those choppings to create lists with the data that we are bringing in. Okay, just as a reminder, the file that we're going to be working on is called grades.csv, and it contains names, first name, social security, values for the test, and then the final grade for these students. Okay, so it looks something like this. Now, the first thing that I would like to do is I would like to take all this content, all this text, and then bring it in as a string, or as one string, or as an array of strings into my program. And the way I'm going to do that is, first of all, I'm going to create a variable called stream, and I'm going to call this row CSV. That's going to be all the text that is going to contain in the file. Is going to be contained in the file. And one of the easiest ways to read text from files in C# is by going to the system library that contains basically all the functionality of C#, going to inputs and outputs, the namespace, then going to the namespace file, which contains a lot of functions and a lot of goodies to manipulate text and to read text, so read and write. And then there is this one function called ReadAllText that goes to a file path, reads all the text, and then creates a string with all the text contained in that file. So if I do that, I can open and close parentheses, and then here inside of this function, I need to type the path of where my file is. So that would be, in my system, it's going to be something like this, because you can see that my file is in users, glx, desktop, CSV. So I can actually just, in my Windows Explorer, I can just click here, click copy, and then paste this here right away. Okay. However, that doesn't really work because if you remember, strings cannot accept the / character as such, because that character is very special when it comes to strings. That character is the character that we use to signify special characters. So for example, I don't know if you guys know, but for example, \n or \r, those are characters that signify a new line. All right. So because the backslash is used to escape characters and to create code for characters that do not have a specific key representation, then when you actually want to use that character as itself, you have to escape it itself. So when you're writing strings, 2 backslashes is basically 1 backslash that has been escaped. And this is something very strange now that I'm saying it, but yeah. So basically, when you write strings, you have to when you have a backslash character, and that's what you want in your string, you have to add another one to escape it. Now, this is not very clean. An alternative to this is using the @ sign and putting it in front of the string, so that what you're saying with this is that you're not going to escape anything in your string, and that backslash characters should be treated as such. They should not be treated as escaping characters. All right? Good. So if this works, then I should be able to now take the content of that file, so row CSV, which is a one large string, and then print it to the console. If I do that and if I execute this code, hopefully I'm going to get the contents of that file. It's not going to get, oh yeah, because I forgot I am reading this is the path to the folder, but I actually need to specify which file do I want to read. I want to read grades.csv. If I execute this code, hopefully now, all right, and now you can see that I get all that text in one single string. But wait, what does it mean? How is it that I have all these lines one after the other if row CSV is supposed to be one string? I'm not doing a for loop to go over all of this, right? It is true, but remember that when you have strings, at the end of strings, we have this thing called the new line character, and it's this thing that I just showed before, the backslash with the N or the backslash with the R. And because that is the character that tells the computer that you should go to a new line and keep writing there. So that's why even though it's one single string, we have this invisible character at the end that means go to the next line. And then when this gets printed into the console, we get all these lines one after the other instead of as a continuous one single line as a whole. All right. Okay, so that's great. And then the next thing that I need to do is I need to take this file and I need to chop it. First of all, I need to chop it in lines, in each one of these lines, because right now it's just one single string. And then each one of those lines, I would need to chop it with the commas, okay? Before I do that, instead of chopping all this text by each one of these lines, which is kind of a bit of a tedious, it's not tedious, actually quite easy, but I guess what I want to say is that I have an alternative when saying ReadAllText, and it is that instead of using the ReadAllText method, I could use an alternative method called system.io.file. And if you scroll, you see you have ReadAllText, you have ReadAllBytes to see the actual representation of those characters in binary, and then you have here ReadAllLines. This method, I find it more interesting for what we're trying to do, because what it gives me back is is an array of all the lines. It reads all the lines of the file one by one, and then it returns an array of strings. So what this method is doing is that it's already chopping the string, the text contained in the file, is chopping it by different lines. So I'm going to just use this, and then I'm going to copy paste here, and the path to the file. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save this in a variable which is going to be an array of strings, and I'm going to call this, for example, CSV lines. Okay? And if I were to print this, then it probably won't print. It will probably tell me like system32 an array of strings. Yes, exactly. So what I need to do is, instead of that, I need to, with a for loop, to print each one of the CSV lines.length, each one of these lines one by one. So, okay. And if I run this code now, yes, so I have each one of the lines printed with a for loop. Okay. All right, so now let's go to the next part, which is we're going to now take each one of these lines, chop it, and then take each one of the elements one by one. Let's take a look at how to do that. Alrighty. How are we holding on there? Are we good? Okay. So, so what we're going to do now is we are going to take this, read the contents of the CSV file as individual lines. Okay. So now we're going to go here, and then we're going to take a look and then take the names, for example. And we're going to take the grades. Okay. can use split, and we can use, for split, we can use just this separator, right? Or maybe I have to use this. Yeah. Why can I not use? Oh, yes, I can. No, I cannot. Cannot convert from string to char. All right. I guess that's a JavaScript thing then. And if I run this, I'm going to get the array. Yes. Okay. Split each row into column data. Okay. All right, let's do this. Okay, so now that we have an array with all the lines, what I'm going to do is that inside of this for loop that I was using to print, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into each one of the lines in my CSV file, so each one of the strings that is contained in my array, and for each one of them, I'm going to split the line with the separator values, because remember, if we have something that looks like this, each comma is separating, is basically telling me which one of the columns I should be in. So that's very easy to do. What we can do is we can say, I'm going to create an array. Well, before I do that, let me say, for example, I have CSV lines. For example, the first one, the second one, the third one. And because C# knows that these are strings, when I press the dot operator, it gives me access to all the operations and all the methods that I can use for string objects. And one of the most common ones, you can see it's already here highlighted in favorites, is a split, which tells me that I can split a string into substrings that are based on the characters in this array. And I can see that the return, what it's giving me back, is another string, another array of strings. So what I can say here is I can create another variable. I'm going to call this row data, okay? And this is going to be equal to the result of splitting this string, each one of the strings, by the character separator. And that's going to be the comma. And I want you to notice how in this case I am using the single quotes because this is a character, and characters in C# are written with the single quote. If it was double quotes, it would be taken as a string, and I believe that this will not work because it needs one single character as a separator. Is that correct? Yes, I'm getting an error here. Okay, so that's going to be that. Okay, and which means that now for each one of these, what I can say is, for example, I can write another for loop where I'm going to say, let me just print the value of row data. Let me print each one of these things to the console. Okay, so console write line and then row data at position J. And then if I run this code, you can see that I'm getting one by one. I am getting here printed on the console each one of the elements of each row. So we have last name, first name, SNS, test1, test2. So that's going to be the first row here. And then it's going to be alfalfa, allosius, the social security number, and so on and so on. I have each one of the elements now of the array of each one of these rows. Okay? So one thing that I want to do is, because you have noticed how I'm also parsing the very first row of the CSV file. And this first row is good for me to understand what type of information is in that row. This is typically called the header of the CSV file, but it's actually not meaningful when it comes to actual data. This is not a student data. This is just the header. So I probably don't want to parse that as data. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to start, instead of starting with the first line of my CSV, I'm going to start with the second line. So I'm going to start with I equals 1, so that I skip that first header row. And if I now go all the way up, you see that I am not printing anymore the header because I don't want that as part of my data. Okay? And now that I have here, I have a string. I have an array that contains all the strings of each one of my rows separated by commas. Then now I can start with, because now I have all the individual data points, now I can do with this data whatever I need to do in my program. So for example, let's say that I wanted to create a list with all the first names of my students. The first names of my students are the second column. So the column that is in position number 1, because it's the second column and we start counting by 0. So what I could do is, I could say create lists with the CSV data, and I could create here a new list, for example, first names, and this is going to be a new list of string objects. Okay, so I create an empty list, and then what I do here is that for each one of these rows, because I know that the row data is ordered by first element, second element, third element, etc. What I can say is, well, from the row data, can you take the second element? So that's going to be element number 1. And now can we take this second element, this string, and add it to the list of first names? So I can do first names dot add, and then row data here. So with the for loop, I'm going over all the rows, I'm splitting them, and then I'm taking the second element and adding it to this list. All right? And then just for the sake of making sure that this is working, I'm going to copy this for loop here. I'm going to change it to first names dot count, because I want to print all the names of this list, and I'm going to say console right line and then first names in position I. And if I run this code now, you can see that I get a list with all the first names. And just to make it a bit more clear, let me copy paste this here and say first names, and then just print that out to the console. Okay? So now I have indeed been able to take from the CSV file, I have been able to parse each one of the rows, and I have been able to just extract each one of the first names from this list and put them together in a list that I can now use. Sorry, I'm distracted because I got distracted because I was like, where is this name? It's not on the list, but it's because I copy pasted and I'm not starting from the beginning. So now this person, Aloysius, should be the first one. Okay, yeah, that was an error for copy. Copy pasting is the devil, okay? I keep saying it. Be very careful with copy pasting. It leads to a lot of badness, okay? My point being, I have been able now to read the whole CSV, chop it into lines, take each one of the lines, chop it into individual data elements, and then the element that I'm interested in taking, just bringing it to a list that I now have as a sorted list of all the first names of the students. Similarly, if I wanted to do last names, for example, I can just copy paste this and say last names is going to be another empty string. And then I'm going to copy paste here and say last names. To last names, I want to add the element that is at position 0 in each one of my rows. So I want to add element that is at position number 0. And then now I can copy paste this here, for example, and say this is going to be last names, and this is going to be last names, and this is going to be last names, and then I can print here first names and last names. And I have these two lists with this very relevant data about my students. Okay? Now, what if I wanted, for example, to store the final grade of the students? Okay? This final grade is a number, all right? So what I could do is I could say, all right, bar final grades is going to be a new list of double elements. Okay? And then here we could think that, oh, it's got to be as easy and as just saying final grades and then add row data number, what is it? It's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is going to be in position number 7. But something is wrong. Okay? I'm getting an error here. What is this error? Let's see what it tells me. I cannot convert from a string to a double. This is a very common error when we are parsing CSV files. And this is because when you are parsing the data from a CSV file, remember, all the data that we got from the CSV file were an array of string objects. And then when we split each one of the rows with a comma, what we get is also an array of string objects. So even though what we have in position 7 is just numbers and a dot, even though that is the case, and us as humans, we can see that these are numbers, for the computer, the representation that the computer is using to store that in memory is a string. And the computer doesn't really care, doesn't really look at what the data looks like. So technically, this, what is in position number 7, is a string type object, and therefore cannot be stored in a list that is taking doubles. So what we need to do is, before we store those grades here in final grades, we need to take that string and we need to convert it into a double. Okay? So how can we do that? There's a couple of ways we can do that. So for example, let's say double grade is going to be equal to convert dot to double. And then here I'm going to pass the row data number 7 string. Okay? And then here I'm going to add the G value. Okay? And then if I do that, let's see if that works. The code now works. And then here I can probably print now the final grades. And this is going to be final grades dot count and final grades in position I. If I print this, now you can see that for each one of them, I have the value of the final grades. And because all their decimals are 0, even though I do have the decimal, C# doesn't bother printing that to the console because it's 0. Okay? So I think we're pretty much done because we are now, it's a bit laborious, okay? Because right now we have to split everything manually. We have to create independent lists of data for each data type, so the first name, the last name, the grades, etc. And some of them we actually have to manually convert them to numbers or maybe Boolean values or maybe other types of data. Okay, but the data is there and the process is there. Now, if we wanted to just take more and more of this list of data, it's just a matter of adding more of these parsing operations and adding to the list here inside of the main for loop that we're using to parse over each one of the lines of code and then split them into each one of the data units. Am I so predictable, Rafael? All right. Okay. So we are good. So we have the file that parses the data. We have the file that parses the data. Is there anything else I want to say before I move on to the next video? Is there anything else that I want to say before? Because I think what I want to do in the next video is I want to create a student class, give it name, last name, and then just parse all of this and pack it into the student class. So I think I want to do that. because that's interesting and it's very object oriented. So that's one thing I want to do. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to now move this code into Grasshopper and do a similar thing for planes, and then get all the planes, from the CSV file. Is there anything else? Oh yeah, I want to mention that this is risky because if the data is not well done, then if you see, then we may get an error. Because if I do this on this file now, I will get an error, right? Because it can't parse. Yes. And then I want to finish the video by saying that the next thing I'm going to do is instead of bringing everything as individual lists of data, I want to create a class that represents each one of the students with properties and with methods. Okay. Okay. Can you hear my neighbors? They're being very loud right now. Okay. So let's do this. Oh, and my other microphone is also running out of battery. If you stop hearing sound, can you please just blast the chat, please? Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to wrap up. Okay. Before we move on, I want to mention something. This code, so we could keep adding more final grades, test grades, etc. And we could just parse all the data here. I just want to mention that this code is okay for a data set that is small and that we can visually understand, but it's not very resilient because typically CSV files or data sets in general, it's great if they're all so consistent and so nice and clean as this one, where we have data for all the columns and the data looks good for all the columns. But remember how at the beginning of the video, I detected by opening in a spreadsheet, I detected that this one line had an error and it had a missing comma, and therefore each one of the columns was offset by 1 unit, which meant that the column with the final grades, on this line of code, it had a letter instead of a number. What that means is that if I were to run my code on this faulty CSV file with an error, what I would get is that the code will not execute because when the code gets to this line, the line that has an A in the column of the final grades, then it's not able to parse or to convert this letter into a double, and therefore my code breaks. So what is the solution to that? Well, it depends on what you're doing, and it depends on the data exploration and the quality of the data that you have. You may want to add exceptions here where you check if what you're reading can be converted to a double or not, and therefore add that element to the list or not. But also, this is not great practice because imagine that I decided not to add this one particular data here. I would have then an offset between the names, last names, and then when it comes to final grade, that is a gap, and then that doesn't add up to, and then I start having like I start having one offset between the names, the list of names, and between the list of grades. So ideally what you want to do is implement something where if one of the data points is not valid, you probably want to discard the whole row and just ignore it pretty much, okay? But also something that you can do is this is also for me, and when I do data visualization, for me this is also a really good way of testing a large data set for problems, because if I find a problem by writing a program that breaks, it means that I can detect where there's faulty data and either removing that from the data set, or finding workarounds to figuring that out. Okay. So with that, I think I want to stop here, and I'm going to, in the next 2 videos for this exercise, first of all, the one thing that I want to do is I want to show you a technique for data parsing, which is instead of having individual lists for each one of the columns that I'm trying to bring in from the data set, a very common technique is to create a class that represents, for example, a student, and that I use to store each one of the data points of that student. So I would like to have a student that has a name, a last name, all the tests and the final grade, etc. And then that student encapsulates each one of the rows of the information. So I'm going to record a video to show you how to do that. And then the next video that I'm going to do afterwards is taking this CSV parsing idea, bringing it into a different environment, not Visual Studio, but bringing it to a 3D modeling environment like Rhino and Grasshopper, writing a similar script in that environment so that I can take data from motion capturing, from a movement in 3D with a video game controller, and then parse that into geometrical objects that I can see in 3D in that modeling environment. Okay, so if you're interested in that, just follow up on the next 2 videos of this exercise series. All right, cool. So next exercise is going to be, so this is going to be CSV Reader 1, and then I probably want to create another project that's going to be CSV Reader 2, and that's going to be with a class. CSV Reader with a class. Okay. And then I'm going to maintain pretty much what I had here, similarly. And then should I what am I going to do? I'm going to remove all of these, and should I write the class while I'm typing this? Should I write the class while I am typing, while I'm recording the video, or should I just type it in for the most part? Well, I can probably just write it, and then, because otherwise the video is going to be a little longer, and I can point people to the live stream if they want to see how I wrote this. I can write it partially. Okay, so I'm going to just do it offline. So I'm going to create a new class here, and then the class is going to be called student, okay? And then the class student is going to have a string, first name, last name, and then what else do we have? Social security number, and social security, tests. So this is going to be an array of integers. Are these integers? Let's say doubles. Test scores, and that's going to be a new double array of 4 elements, and test 1, test 2. Then we want to have final grade, and then final test. Final test. Test scores. So that's going to be final test. So let's just do 5, and then string here that is going to be grade. So, and then we're going to create the constructor, which is going to be empty. And then I'm going to explain why I want an empty constructor, because I'm going to create a method And then here I'm going to write a string override to string. I think public override string to string, and I also probably want this to be public, and I want this to be public, and this is also a public class. And here I'm going to say string str is going to equal what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to create a class that has all the data for the student. I'm going to create an empty constructor because I will pass the way I will create the data. I will explain that actually. I can explain that in the video. I can use the constructor to create that actually. And then here I'm going to say, for example, and this is going to be first name, last name, and this is going to be test scores 0, and then hyphen scores 1, 2. Wait, what am I doing here? I'm totally messing this up. Test scores 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Can I enter? Does this work? Okay. And then I have to close the. Oh no. Yes, I have to close that, and then a comma here, and then this is going to be final grade. Great. And I'm going to return this. Okay. I think this should be good. Okay, I think I can start here. And should I open the CSV reader, the other file? I probably want to open the other file and show what I did. Okay. All right, let's do this. Hi. So in my previous video on this series of this exercise of reading CSV files and using them to for whatever design you're using, in my previous video what I did was I taught you how to take a CSV file that was in your system and then parse the text, chop it into different units of data with the commas and the new lines, and store that information as lists of strings or doubles or whatever that information. Okay. However, what I want to show you in this video is like a bit more of a cleaner approach to this idea, which is instead of maintaining different lists with the different columns of data in the CSV, what I want is to create an object that represents each one of these students in the rows of data, and then using a class to represent each one of these students, and then store the units of information inside of that inside of that student object. Okay, so in order to do that, I'm going to use object-oriented programming, and I'm going to create a class of the type student, and that I'm going to use to store that information. So I have this new project that I have here where I am still reading all the CSV files as different as an array of strings, okay? But then what I'm doing now is that I have created this other file called, I have created this other, I'm messing this up. I have created this other file called a student class here in my project, okay? And I have created a bunch of properties for this student. Remember that the data looks something like this. So I have created that the student needs to have at least 3 string properties: the first name, the last name, and the social security number. And the social security number is a string because it has these hyphen characters. So I'm going to store it as a string because I really don't care about that. Then I'm going to create, because I have 5 scores, test 1, 2, 3, 4, and the final one. I'm going to store them as an array of scores. And then last but not least, I am going to have another property, which is the grade, the final grade that the student had, as a string, okay? And then what I'm going to do now, and I also created this override to the toString method, so that when I create a student and when I print it to the console, I get a nice line with the name, all the scores, and then the final grade of the student, okay? If you're interested in how I did this, you're welcome to check the actual live stream where I recorded this video. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to where I was, and I'm going to say I'm going to iterate with a for loop over all the lines, all the strings in my array of data, over all the lines that I took from the CSV file, starting from the second one because I want to skip the header, okay? And then for each one of these lines, I want to create a new student object that has all this data. So something that I could do is I could do like I did before. I could take the row of data, split it with commas, then start taking the first element and assigning it to the last name property, the first name property, etc., etc. But that would be a little tedious, at least to do it in my main program, okay? And typically a very good way of approaching, a good design when it comes to computer programs is to encapsulate or to send as much of the functionality that you can into for objects into the actual object. So if we know that in this particular case, for this particular student, we're always going to be creating student objects from a line of string values that is coming from a CSV file, then it's typically considered a better approach, instead of doing all the parsing and all of the data and the chopping in the main program and then creating the object here, it's actually considered better practice to just do all that processing inside of the actual class that is going to be generating that object. So typically something that in other forms we would do, which is just taking here, okay, give me the name, give me the last name, give me the last name, etc., as information that is passed to the constructor. Because in this case, we know that we're always going to be starting this object from a line, from a string that has all that information. Then why not just say, well, I'm going to create objects by just passing the full line with all the data. And then let's trust that the student class is going to do a good job at taking all that line, splitting it, chopping it, parsing, and then populating its own data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create each one of these student objects from the full row of data that I am reading from the CSV file. So what I'm going to do here now is that I'm going to say, I want to create a student object called student, and that's going to be a new student that is going to come from CSV lines. So I'm passing the full line, right? The second one, the third one, the fourth one, I'm passing the whole thing with its commas, its string representation, whatever. And I'm hoping that the class will take that and will parse the whole data and then give me back an object with all that data inside. And then once this is still not implemented, I'm going to do it right now, but let's imagine that this already works. Now that when I'm done with this, what I want is to store in a list, for example, called students, I want to store all these elements. So I want to create a list of student objects, and then I want to add to the students, I want to add this new student that I just created. Okay, and let me rename this. I'm just going to call it ST. Okay, for example, it doesn't really matter, but it's a little less confusing perhaps. Okay, and then here in another for loop, I could say int I equals 0, I is less than the amount of students, so students.count, I++, and then here I want to print to the console each one of these students. So students, square brackets, I. Okay, and technically that should print each one of the students. But you can see that this code right now, what is happening is that it's printing this string of data, which is coming from the fact that I created this string representation. So I did an override of the toString method. I have other videos where I explain this. And then I just created this composite of a string with all the information that is contained inside of this object. Okay, so that I have a nice representation of each one of the students. But right now I don't have it because I haven't really, when I create the students, I pass the information to the constructor, but I haven't really done any of the information. So all the data that is present for each one of the student objects is empty data. Is the data, the default data that happens when you create variables, which is for strings, it's just an empty string, and then for doubles, it's just the number 0. Okay? So, but at least I have the right amount. I have one student for each one of the lines in my CSV data. So now what I need to do is I need to go back into my student class, and now that I have the main structure of the program, I am taking each one of the lines, I'm creating a student object with that line, and I'm printing it into the console. Then here what I need to do is I need to make sure that inside of the student class properly takes that line of code, chops it in the commas, and then populates first name, last name, social security with each one of the correct data points. Let me show you how I would do this for a couple of data points. So for example, the first thing that I would need to do is I would need to chop the string like I did in my previous video. So I'm going to call data, and I'm going to say row data. I need to split this by the character comma. Okay, and that gives me an array of strings with each one of the data points as element of the column. And then, for example, last name is the first one and first name is the second one. So I can say now parse data into properties, okay, and say last name of this object. So this dot last name is going to be equal to data 0, the first element in the array. This dot first name is going to be equal to data dot 1, the first element in the array. Okay. The next one is social security number. This, let me dock this here to the side, and then let me unpin this. So this dot social security number is data dot 2. Okay. Now we have the 5 numerical test entries, which I have here created as an array. So what I can say is this test scores, the first test score, so the first one on the array has to be data has to be the fourth element in my CSV, so element in position number 3. So data.3. But this is not going to work for the reasons that I explained in the previous video, because this is technically a string when I read it from the CSV file and when it's coming from the string array. So I need to convert this to a double. So convert dot to double. And I've also explained in the previous video how this can give me errors if the data is not properly formatted, but it doesn't matter because sometimes it's actually good that you have this error so that you see that your data is faulty and you can decide whether if to change it, delete it, modify it, or write other things. So now for each one of the elements, I can say 1, 2, 3, and 4 should be 4, 5, 6, 6, and 7. Okay? And well, we could get away with this, but you know, also, if we wanted to write something a bit cleaner, we could probably use a for loop to do this, but it doesn't matter. We're already there, so okay. And then the grade is going to be equal to the element in position number 8, which is this one here on last. So I believe now we have taken all the data from the row, and we have taken each column and we have assigned it to the proper variables that we wanted. Let's see if I run this code now and if I get a proper printout for each one of the students. All right, and you can see that now the input string is not in the correct format, so I'm getting some kind of error. So I can see that one of the data points is not correct. So what that's going to be, what is it going to be? It's going to be the second one. So I can see here that, yeah, here you see, I had this one character, this back quote. So this was, you see, this was a way of detecting that I had an error in my data. So I'm going to save that file again. I'm going to stop this program and then run it again. And as I do, now you can see that I have a nice printout for each one of the data points of this CSV file. So what's interesting now is that this code is very clean, is very elegant, and it encapsulates in this class that I have created, it encapsulates the representation of all the data that is part of the CSV file. So now in my main program, I have a list with all these student objects, okay? And then if I were using these student objects for storing them in a database or managing user accounts or something like this, then this class is a really, really good representation that I can use to exchange student objects between different parts of my program. And it's a very elegant, very clean, and very encapsulated way of working with this data. So I really recommend that you always try parsing data instead of independent lists, which can be a little messy, and turn it into classes. Okay. All right, so I think that's it for this video. And in the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this other data set that I have, which is called, which is coming from the recording of human motion in three-dimensional space with video game controllers. So it's a bunch of, it's a really crazy data set, but it's a bunch of X, Y, Z properties and X of the center of the controller and the orientation of the controller. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all this data, I'm going to parse it from a CSV file, I'm going to bring it into a 3D modeling environment, Rhino and Grasshopper, and I'm going to write C# scripts in Grasshopper so that I can plot this motion as planes in three-dimensional space, which will also be useful for another series of videos that I want to do, which is plotting and doing a representation of that motion with three-dimensional geometry in the modeling environment. So if you're interested, follow me up on the next video. Alrighty, so let's do that, no? So that's good. Okay. So what do we do now? We need Rhino. Do I have Rhino? Oh, I had Rhino here, open. How's everyone doing? Chandra, how are you doing, sir? Okay. Alrighty, so we have Rhino. So here, perspective. So here, and I probably want to prepare the file before getting into the nitty-gritties. So I probably want to create a C# file, and that's going to be CSV path. Okay. Do I typically... Thank you, Kiran. Do you usually parse data into objects in Grasshopper? Yeah, I typically do. Especially because the data that I'm going to be parsing now is basically X, Y, Z. It are centers. There are centers of the of their the center of the motion control, and they are the planes. So so I typically parse them into points or vectors or planes or whatever. So I'm going to show you how to do that actually. And then so I want the CSV path. Do I need anything else? I probably don't, right? So and this is going to be a string. Okay. And oh, I want to do, what do I want to do? I want it bifocals, right? Where are the bifocals? Here. Okay, we want to do bifocals. We want to put them somewhere here. Then I'm going to paste here the path to motion 1. And this is going to be motion1.csv. Okay. And so that's going to be that one. And this is going to be motion 2 because I have the 2 files. That's the C# script. And then here, what am I going to do? CSV, read all lines. And I also want to show this file here. Do I have videos of students recording this motion? I do have. I must have somewhere. So this should be assignment 0 presentation. There you go. Where is this? Okay. Okay. Well, but this is not this one, because it's not really showing students like moving their arms. Okay, I think this one is good. Yeah. Okay, so I can explain where the data came from. Motion. Motion. And so I have motion, I have the data, timestamp to origin. Wait, so if I do this, okay. Okay. So I probably want to show this. And so how am I going to start? I'm going to start by saying this is a video that I want to do where I'm going to show you how to bring in that data from it's going to bring in that data from a motion file and then parse it inside of Grasshopper C# and then show okay, all right, and I'm going to start where with this CSV file. This is crazy. Okay, I may just start here with this video. Okay. Wait, let me show. I do have the actual data somewhere. We published the data set, GSD. Huh? Compute. Wait, I do have GSD 638. What? Because it's not mine. Okay, wait. So maps GSD, this one. Okay. Fall 2000. Okay. Okay. All right. I think we're good. All right. Hi, and welcome to this video where I'm going to show you how to take a data set of a CSV file which contains a data set of the motion that was recorded by moving video game controllers in three-dimensional space. And then I'm going to show you how to parse all this data, bring it into a 3D modeling environment like Rhino and Grasshopper in this case, and write C# scripts to take all this data, parse it, and then turn it into three-dimensional planes that we can use to visualize this data, and then to perhaps manipulate it and create some kind of like nice visualization of this motion, which is what I will do in the next video of this series. I want to first show you how this is coming from an assignment that I gave my students in the Introduction to Computational class that I teach. Introduction to Computational Design class that I teach at Harvard University. And what you can see is that they were using HTC motion controllers and they were moving in three-dimensional space and they were saving that data in order to create visualizations of that motion. So what that data looks like is something like this. It's basically a CSV file that contains columns for, first of all, for the timestamp at which that was recorded, and then X, Y, Z values of the center of one controller, X, Y, Z values for the X-axis of one controller, so the main direction, X, Y, Z values for the Y-axis, so the secondary direction, and then a bunch of other metadata as, for example, whether if the user was pressing the trigger or not, and values for the touchpad. So these controllers have this touchpad button that you can move your finger around, and then it gives you the value of like how far off in the touchpad these values are, the finger is. So I have these files here in my system as motion 1 and motion 2. You've seen them open in Excel, and then here this is a representation, for example, if you just open the CSV file in a plain text editor. So it's just like a header that tells you what each column means, and then a bunch of numbers and true and falses representing the values for each one of the readings of the motion controller at each, I don't know if it was like 30 times per second or 15 seconds per second. I actually don't know about that. We can read that from the timestamp actually. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Rhino and Grasshopper to parse the CSV file from my system, take all the data, construct geometrical objects such as planes, and then visualize them here in Grasshopper. That's going to be the scope of this video. I want to mention though that the full data set of recordings of the motion that we did for that class last year was open source and was publicly available. It's here under github.com/gsd6338, which is the name of the class. And if you go to fall 2019, you can go to assignment 0 and you can download a zip file with all the recordings of all the students. I have chosen a couple of them, and I have them here in my system now, and those are the ones that I'm going to be using to read into Grasshopper. I also want to mention, I don't know where you're coming from, but this is the last video on a series of videos where I explain how to read CSV files from C#, from any C# environment. So I actually recorded previous videos where I showed how to read CSV files from vanilla C# inside of Visual Studio, and I showed how to also do it in a more clean way, which is taking that data and turning it into native objects or classes. Okay, so I'm not going to be explaining that. You should have watched those videos before here, so I'm going to assume in this video that we already know how to parse a CSV file, and then I'm going to cut straight to the chase and taking this file, parse it real quick and turn it into geometry objects that we will be using as the base of our motion visualization in my next exercise video, in the next algorithmic modeling video. Okay, so shall we start? All right, shall we start? Okay, so how are we going to start? We're going to start by saying I'm going to explain that I need to come here, I need to create a C# script, and then I'm going to start copy pasting like a lot of the code, really. Read all the lines, create a reader class. Actually, why not just start? I'm going to move this somewhere here. Why not just start doing this? I'm going to just turn this into a string, and then I'm just going to do it real quick because if people are coming from the other videos, I don't want to bore them with doing this again. Motion 0. No, I'm not. I have to read this from the input CSV path. Okay, and then I'm going to write a for loop where I go over CSV lines.length, and then I take each one of these elements and then split it. So that's going to be string data is going to be CSV lines.I split with the comma. Okay, and if I run this should be fine, which is not. So value cannot be null. Parameter name path in. Oh yeah, because I have to plug this in here. Huh? What is going on here? Could not find the file. Oh yes, because it's an underscore here, and then it's an underscore here, And then can it find the file? I cannot because it's being accessed by another file. Boring. So what if I use the other one? This one should be fine. Okay. Because I want to have that to be able to read the headers. Okay. Alrighty. So, okay. And then T0 plane. Okay, for example. T0 planes. All right. Okay, so let's start by the beginning. What you can see is that I have here a Grasshopper file where I have written in two different panels the paths in my system to where I can find the files. So these are motion 1 and motion 2, but you're welcome to go to the GitHub repo, download the file and use whichever files you're interested in using there. Okay, so I'm pointing to the where in my system those files are. I have created a C# component that takes one input, and you have to remember to set the type of the input to the string. So this is going to be the path where the component needs to find this CSV file. Okay, and then I also created an output for this component, which is going to be the planes of the first controller. Remember that in this particular file, I was recording two controllers at the same time. So I'm going to start working with generating the planes for one of the controllers, and then by the end of this video, I may actually do the both controllers or whatever. I don't know. And then if I double click here, you can see that I've already entered some data, some code. So for example, I am reading the contents of that file that is coming in by using the system file read_lines function and taking the CSV path that is coming into the component as an input. And then here I'm writing a for loop where I am going over all the lines in that CSV file, so all the lines in the string of text, and starting from the second one because I want to skip the header that is not real data. Okay, and then I'm taking that line of code, that line of data, I'm splitting it with the comma characters, and I'm storing that in an array of strings which represents the data for each one of the rows. So maybe this should be called row data a bit more precisely. Okay, so all of this was explained in my previous videos, so I think I'm going to start here now, and I'm going to start parsing the data of my CSV file into Rhino and Grasshopper objects that I can use to represent on the screen. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the centers of the planes of my first controller, and I'm going to create them as points, and I'm going to plot them on the screen. If we look back at the CSV file, I'm going to be using Excel, even though I already explained that this is basically a plain text file, but I think it's a bit easier to read the columns in Excel than it is in this data file here, in this text file. So you can see that if we move to the left, the first column is the timestamp, which we will want to parse at some point, but you can see that the first, the second, and the third columns are the X, Y, Z coordinates of the origin of motion controller T0 of the first one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, let me parse the first three columns, 1, 2, and 3, parse them into numbers, and then create a point with those numbers, store that point in a list, and then that's what I spit out as part of the component. So let me create here a list of origins, for example, and this is going to be a new list of point 3D objects, okay? And that's going to start as empty. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, first of all, I'm going to create a variable called x, for example, which is going to be the conversion to double, where is double, to double of the data row data, which is present at column 1, so the second column, right? So that's going to be this, and then I could do the same for y and for z, and then I could use 2 and 3. Okay, and with that I could create a point 3D origin 0 of origin of the first controller, which is going to be a new point 3D object with the x, y, and z coordinates that I just parsed from the CSV file. Now to origins, I'm going to add this new point that I created, origin 0, okay? And I'm going to run this code to see if I have any errors. So I'm going to run it. It looks like everything is fine, but I'm not seeing anything on the screen. That's because I am not outputting anything from this component. So temporarily, you know, I said that the output was going to be T0, the planes, but temporarily, instead of planes, I'm just going to spit out these origins. So just to make sure that that this is working okay, so I'm going to say the planes that I want to output for the time being, I'm going to be outputting just the origins. So I'm going to click this, it works, this changed to data, and I can see that, oh, I have a blob of stuff here. Oh, look at this stuff. How beautiful is this, huh? So it looks like I do have some kind of notion of motions. I have like a list of ordered points in three-dimensional space. And just to make sure, let me visualize those with like a NURBS curve. So for example, let me interpolate a NURBS curve through all these vertices and see what that looks like. And I can see that indeed they are, they're very ordered, you know. So I have been able to generate, for example, a curve in 3 dimensions with the inputs of the first controller of the motion. I think this is already kind of cool, right? So I could record the motion of that controller, and now I can plot it in 3-dimensional space, and I could do a lot of things. I can, for example, I can pipe this, right? I can create a tube around this curve. Maybe this cube is going to be very dense because there's so many points. I'm going to crash my grasshopper. Yes, so the radius was way too much. So for example, let's say we do 0.05, okay? And then you see, I was able to now generate this kind of pipe geometry along that trajectory of the motion that I have recorded. I find it amazing. I don't know what you guys think, but I find it amazing that from this crazy list of unfathomable numbers, turns out that I have like a really nice hand trajectory in this recording. Okay. Okay, but let's not stop there, because if you remember, the motion controller not only has location in 3-dimensional space, it also has orientation. So the people who were recording were moving their hand and were doing this kind of motion, which is also information that is present in the dataset and could be super interesting for visualization. So let's bring that in as part of the plane. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say, well, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to start adding more data to this. I'm going to parse more data from the CSV. So you can see from the CSV that I have other columns here, x-axis x, y, and z. So I have the x, y, z coordinates of the x-axis of the orientation of the controller, and I have x, y, z for the y-axis, so the secondary axis of the orientation of the controller. With the point that I've already parsed, and with the main vector and with the second vector, I will be able to create a 3-dimensional plane that represents the orientation of the player while they were moving their hand in 3-dimensional space. So let me parse these 6 columns into 2 vectors and then create a plane that is using those two vectors and that origin. So let me say, for example, I'm going to say I'm going to reuse these variables here because I've already used them to create the points, so I can actually reuse them. That is not great practice, but I'm kind of hungry and I want to go have lunch, so let's just reuse them for this one. Okay, so now let's take this, and then I'm going to remove here where I declare them, because you cannot declare them twice, and this is going to be 4, 5, and 6. And then here I'm going to say vector 3D x-axis is going to be a new vector 3D with X, Y, and Z. Okay, so this is going to be the X-axis. This is going to be the origin. Okay, and this is going to be, now I'm going to copy paste all of this again because I'm going to reuse the X, Y variables. This is going to be the Y-axis. So now this is going to be 7, 8, and 9. Those are the positions of the columns in the table. And now this is going to be Y-axis. Okay, so now I have created, and I'm going now to remove this. I have been able to parse from my data set 3 objects: the origin, the X-axis, and the Y-axis of the main controller. I can take that data and turn it into controller 0 plane by saying, let me create a plane object called PL0, for example, and that's going to be a new plane. And you can see that as I open parentheses, it gives me options about what can I input to create a new plane. And what I'm going to choose is to create a plane out of the origin, the X direction, and the Y direction, which is what I have in my data set. So that's going to be origin 0, X-axis, and Y-axis. Okay, and then controller 0 planes. I'm going to rename that list, and then I'm going to the list of controller 0 planes, I'm going to add this controller plane that I just created, and I'm going to plug that in here. Oh, and something went wrong. What did I do? Can I convert Rhino geometry plane to Rhino geometry point 3D? Yes, because I forgot that when I created the list of controller 0 planes, the type that I specified here was point 3D. So I need to change this to a plane object so that when I add that here, this can contain that data type. And as I do that, oh, it looks like everything is working. So if I turn this on, so I get this cloud of really crazy planes, but that's because I am representing them with a very big size, with 1 unit. So I'm going to, in my grasshopper, I'm going to go to preview plane size, and I'm going to lower the size of these planes. And now you can see, if I rotate around, you can see that for each one of the points, I also have the orientation of that plane, which is kind of nice because I can see how in this cloud of motion, I can see how most of the planes were actually pointing out. So it looks like the user was doing this motion where they were pointing outwards of this motion with the hand, which I think is super interesting. And therefore, if I were to do, for example, let me just populate this with cones, right? So you could see, and this is probably like super large as well, but you can see how now if I reduce the length of these cones, and actually let me reduce this as well. Okay, so we can see now how by representing with cones, I can see where the controller was pointing at any given time. How cool is this? All right. So this is basically the core of taking this data set, parsing each one of the columns into information, and then using that information to represent it in 3-dimensional form in Grasshopper. Okay, so let me take a pause, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to now add more code for the other controller, and then I'm going to show you what this would look like finished. I don't think you need to see me typing that, but if you're interested in seeing me typing all of that code, just go to the live stream video where I recorded this video. Okay, so let me show you how that would look like when incorporated all of this data inside of the parser. Okay, so I'm going to type all of that real quick, and then we're going to take a break. Okay, how does that sound? Okay, so let me turn this off, and then origin, x-axis 0, 0, 0, 0, then I can copy trigger so okay, so touchpad press, touchpad press that just clicked. What about motion 2? Does this file have, was the user pressing the trigger up or down? No, everything is false. There was no pressing anywhere. That sucks. Andres, the files, you can download all the files from the GitHub repo that I just showed. Let me show you. The GitHub repo is here. You can download all the files from the GitHub repo there. There's in assignment 0, there's a file, and you can download everything from there. You can also download the final projects of the class. It's too bad. So I think I will use this one then. And there was no pressing here. That sucks. Touchpad pressed. Okay. So let me then write here real quick controller 0 planes. So let's do controller 1 planes, and then let's copy paste a lot of this for so for this is going to be for controller 0. I'm going to copy this for controller 1, and I'm not going to remove, I want to remove this. And then if this is column number 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So I start at 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. And this should be origin 1, axis 1, axis 1, and PL 1, origin 1, axis 1, axis 1, controller 1 planes. This is PL 1 here, controller 1 planes. Okay, and so that doesn't work. I need to add here T1 planes. Oops. T1 planes. And why it's not working? Because it's being used by another process. Okay, whatever. And then I should be able to do here T1 planes, controller 1 planes, and run this and show them. Yes. Oop, something is not right here. Oop, you see how they're showing all, something is wrong with the PL1, origin 1, axis 1, axis 1. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So what is wrong? Huh. You see, Rafael, copy pasting is the devil. This is clearly a copy pasting problem. Controller 1 planes. Controller 1 planes. I wonder where the problem is. This is controller 1. X is touchpad. Oh no, because it's not. Okay, yes. 15, 16 is 17. Okay. So 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, much better. So we have that, and we have this here, and then we can turn these two on, and then one is the other, and then, for example, we can just do a line between them. Yep, this is very nice, actually. Okay, and then so that's working. And what else I want to do? I want to also show how to parse trigger pressed, trigger clicked. T0 trigger pressed and T0 trigger clicked. And then for T1 also T1 trigger pressed, T1 trigger clicked. And I want to, and this is a list of Boolean, so this is geometry, so that can be planes here, plane, a plane, and then a Boolean. So this is going to be trigger pressed, you know. And then these two, I'm going to copy paste them here. All right, I'm very close to being done. We're going to have a break. I'm going to do a few Q&A before taking a break, and then I'll see you in the afternoon very soon. So that's going to be controller 0, and then so that's going to be 9, and then controller var controller 0 trigger pressed equals a new list of Boolean values. God, a new list of Boolean. Okay, so that's going to be controller trigger clicked, and then these two I'm going to copy paste them here. Trigger 1 control, and then trigger pressed, and then here I'm going to say controller triggers, control trigger press dot add, and then convert to Boolean whatever I am getting from row data 10, which I believe is the next one on the list, and then that's going to be the trigger clicked. It's going to be at element 11, and I need to close the parentheses here, and those triggers I'm going to add them here. So this is going to be 1, 1, and this is going to be 26 and 27. All right, and then T0 trigger pressed equals controller 0 trigger pressed, and this is clicked here, trigger clicked, and it's working, it looks like. And then trigger press and trigger, okay, and it looks like it's working. Okay, so let's wrap up the video then. I have to record the introductory video. Into what we're doing. Okay. And this one, okay, whatever, this one here. Okay, and I think we're good. It took me a little bit of typing, but what you can see now is that for this file, for the CSV file, I have created many more outputs of things that I can parse from the CSV file. And if you remember, the CSV file not only had the coordinates of the plane, but it also had like information about what the user was pressing on the controllers, the trigger, if it was being pressed, if it was being clicked. Pressing is if the trigger is, because the trigger has a degree of value, whether if the trigger was being pressed at all, or whether if it was clicked, which was like it was pressed all the way in. And there was also the trigger value because it's a scalar, so you can press like halfway through it, you know. And then here on the C# file, I have created more lists for things that can come from the controller. So the planes, whether if the trigger was pressed or clicked, and these are booleans in this case, and same information for the plane 1 and trigger and press. And then I have just copy pasted here information from the controller, and then I'm taking from each one of the rows 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 in particular information for the origins and the vectors. I am creating this plane with all the information that I have parsed, and then to the list of Boolean values on whether if the trigger is pressed or not, I am adding the converted data to Boolean that I'm taking from the other columns that are relevant for this data. And then I have basically repeated the same process for controller 1. What you can see now is that I have 6 lists of data, one corresponding to the motion of one of the controllers, the other one corresponding to the motion of the other one, and you can see how very nicely they are very close to each other, which means that the user was probably moving the controllers in this kind of fashion. All right, and actually I can visualize that very easily by creating, for example, a line object that goes from one plane to the other. So what that does is that it creates lines between the centers of the planes, ignoring the orientation. And then you can see how exactly indeed this motion was very clearly the user just doing this motion with the two controllers, but by keeping them very close to each other. Okay, which gives me like a really nice visualization. And I could, for example, now loft a surface over this, or I could use, for example, when the trigger is pressed or click, I could use that as a way of knowing when I should plot that geometry or not, for example. And then I can do a lot of things with this information. It's a very nice data set now. So actually, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to stop the video here. Because what I would like to do is now that we have all this data as planes and geometry objects, I would like to create another video, an algorithmic modeling video, where I'm just going to experiment with this data and see what different ways of visualizing this motion I can do given this data set that I have been able to parse from the CSV file. And I'm going to experiment that with a lot of files from the data set that I just pointed out to you. So if you're interested in that, please follow up. There probably will be a link to that video somewhere here popping up. And also, if you like this series of videos, also feel welcome to subscribe to the channel, to hit notifications, to like this video, and all these things that help us keep this rolling. Okay? Thank you very much, and see you on the next video. All right, and before we close up, I'm going to show, I'm going to write the recorder, the teaser video, so the one at the beginning. And I'm going to show okay, so real quick. Oh, let me show. Okay, let me show this as well. This. Let me. Okay, and here. Let me put this back here. I'm going to move this to the beginning. Okay. Hi, my name is Jose Luis, and this is Parametric Camp. We do computational design videos. And in this series, in this exercise, which is going to be a series of videos, what I'm going to teach you is how to take a data set as a CSV file, and then how to parse that data set and then turn it into graphical objects that I can represent in a three-dimensional environment. What I'm going to teach you is to take a CSV file, a comma-separated values file, and then how to parse it and then take all that information. I'm going to be using this data set of motion that was recorded by some of my students in the class that I teach at Harvard University, the Introduction to Computational Design. They were using video game controllers and they were moving in three-dimensional space and generating these data files that have the information in XYZ of all the controllers and all the motion in three-dimensional space. But before we do that, which is a little bit more complex, what I'm going to show you is how to do a very simple version of that, which is I'm going to be taking a very simple data set, like an example data set of, for example, the grades of imaginary students. So I'm going to teach you how to take a CSV file that has names, test scores, and a final grade. I'm going to teach you how to take that CSV data and read it with a plain vanilla C# program. I'm going to also teach you like an advanced version of that, which is how to take that data and turn each one of those rows of data into an object that represents that student, and that could be very useful for example, for sharing it between databases or between other programs that are representing that object, how to encapsulate all that information in one computational object. And then finally, I will show you how to take that actual data set, the data set of motion controlled, and how to bring it into a 3D modeling environment. I'm going to be using Rhino and Grasshopper because Grasshopper allows me to script in C#. So I'm going to be teaching you how to write all the code that takes all that CSV data. It splits in rows and with the commas, and then we convert all that data into numerical values that we can then use to plot as, for example, planes that have the orientation and the location in three-dimensional space of that motion that the students recorded. And therefore, the result will be this visualization where I can see the motion, the synchronous motion of the two controllers that the students were holding and how they were moving it in three-dimensional space. And therefore, this will be the base of a future video that I will record where I Can you hear me now? This is so annoying. When did the audio go? Ah, God. Okay. Okay, so let me rewind again and let me Okay, so let me record that again, I guess. All right, so let me record that again. Because you can hear me now, right? Yeah, but I have to record the whole thing again. It doesn't matter. I'll record it again. All right. Hi, my name is Jose Luis, and this is parametric video. Parametric video. Okay, starting over again. Hi, my name is Jose Luis, and this is Parametric Camp. It's a YouTube channel where we record videos on computational design. And in this exercise, which is going to be a multi-part video, what I'm going to teach you is to how to take a CSV file that contains a lot of geometrical information and how to visualize it in 3 dimensions. This data set that we're going to be working with is a data set of recordings. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay, let me start over again because I thought there was no audio. But we have audio right now, yes. Okay, let me start over again. Hi, and welcome to another video in Parametric Camp, this channel where we do computational design tutorials and exercises. My name is Jose Luis, and what I would like to show you today is a multi-part video where we're going to do an exercise where we're going to parse a CSV data file, a comma-separated values file, that contains geometric information that has been recorded from the motion of a video game controller in 3-dimensional space. So what I'm going to show you is how to take that data that was recorded on from my students in my computational design class, and let me show you a little bit of what that looked like. They had these video game controllers and they were moving in 3-dimensional space, and we were recording all the parameters of that motion as a CSV file. And this data set is open and you can access it on the main GitHub repository of the class, and it looks something like this. It's just lists and columns of the XYZ coordinates of the center of the controller, the main axis of the controller, and some information related to whether if the user was pressing the buttons or not. What I'm going to focus on this video is to teach you how to take that information and then how to parse it manually with vanilla C# scripting. I'm going to teach you the C# way of taking a CSV file and parsing each one of the lines and chopping it by the commas and then retrieving that information and converting it into lists of usable data. I'm going to teach it the pure C# way, and I'm going to also teach you a little bit of a more clean and elegant way of taking that data, and instead of taking it as lists of Boolean values or double values or text, how to encapsulate that into objects that represent that information. For that, I'm going to be using a simpler data set, an example data set of, for example, student grades. So a data set that contains student names, their social security number, the grades that they took for various exams, and then the final grade. And I'm going to represent those as a student object that I'm going to create, a custom class that I'm going to be doing to encapsulate all that information. I will explain the benefits of how this works because it's really good, for example, when you exchange data for databases or when you want to represent this data in other frameworks. And last but not least, I will teach you how now, after doing it with a basic example with student grades, I'm going to show you how to implement that in a 3D modeling environment. I'm going to be using Rhino and Grasshopper because Grasshopper allows me to script with C#, and then I'm going to be showing you how to take all that vanilla C# knowledge, bring it into Grasshopper, and then use that to visualize in 3-dimensional space the motion of those controllers. So that you can do, for example, so that you can visualize how each one of the controllers, how the user was moving them here, like with this, their 2 hands next to the other, and then how this could be really useful, for example, to start plotting ways to start visualizing ways of this motion, such as, for example, I just did a really quick exercise here. I joined the centers of those planes in three-dimensional space, and it creates this really nice ribbon-like kind of structure. Okay, so in this multi-part video, I'm going to be focusing on the technique of parsing the CSV data and plotting it into something that can be visualized of retrieving it with vanilla C# and then plotting it in a 3D modeling environment. And then in a future video that I will record as a sequel to this exercise, I will be doing an algorithmic modeling challenge where I will now, with the parsed data, I will try to figure out interesting ways of visualizing this motion in three-dimensional space. Okay? So if you're interested in learning how to do this, just stay tuned and continue watching this series of videos. And as usual, if you like this content, please remember to subscribe, notifications, like this video, and all those things that are the YouTube etiquette these days. Okay, see you on the next video. Let's get hands-on. Alrighty, okay. Okay, so I think we are good. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to, if anyone has questions, oh no, wait, CSV, if anyone has questions, we can probably address a few of those right now. Otherwise, I will see you this afternoon, starting at 2 p.m. And what we're going to do is we're going to record another a new video that's going to be an algorithmic modeling challenge. And in that video, I'm going to start from where we left. So with the C# script that can read all the data from the CSV file. And now we're going to start doing simple things such as, for example, taking the planes and joining them with curves, popping data on top of those planes, stretching and scaling that data based on the speed of the motion. We're going to do like a lot of fun stuff as a way of visualizing that motion. So we're going to explore what we can do with that data. Okay? Any questions, any comments before we take a break? I forgot to bring water today. Here, I'm a little thirsty. And it's hot in Boston today. Where's my phone, by the way? I don't know. Okay, well, if there are any questions or comments or anything, I will see you this afternoon at 2 p.m. my time, 2 p.m. Boston time, East Coast in the US. Okay? Well, thank you very much and see you in a bit.